long story short, it's time for me to quit. But long story short is that we have, over the last 23 years, we've continued that same kind of thing. We are in the process now of building a rail transportation, public transportation, from the heart of the city of Chicago to Altgeld Gardens, where that community is isolated, where they can come down and get jobs. You do know we have an Olympics hopefully coming to Chicago in 2016. Well, we want the folks on the far south side of the city to be able to come down to see the Olympics and to be able to take in the economic development from the jobs that comes from creating the venues, all right? And so since we knew that was happening, we discovered that there was an urban legend in Chicago. We have rail system in Chicago, and the Federal Rail Transportation Act says that federal money to build public transportation, public rail transportation, has to be used to connect the most disaffected and disenfranchised communities to the center part of the city. And so in Chicago, we've got, you know, we have very little east side. We have north side, south side, and west side. And so we have a rail system running all the way up north to Evanston and Skokie. We have a rail system that runs out northwest all the way to O'Hare Airport. We have a rail system that runs all the way west to the west suburbs and the jobs out in the western suburbs. And the rail system that runs south stops at 95th Street. Chicago goes all the way to 130th. Well, from 95th south to 130th is almost all African American. And when the rail system was built, and the last station at 95th was built, it was built as a temporary station. That was 40 years ago. It is also the most used rail line in the system, which means it's the most productive, the most lucrative. It really suggests that all the money, that they took the money that all of us from 95th Street South were putting on that red line, which is what it's called, and they built all these other rail stations. And so we tried to get the mayor to do it, the government to do it. They wouldn't do it. So we ended up putting together, after our study, going to Washington, D.C. And we put the proposal straight to Congress through our representatives. And as I almost said fate would have it, but as the Lord would have it, Barack Obama was then senator. And so he pushed it in the Senate. Jesse Jackson Jr. pushed it in the House. And believe it or not, George W. Bush signed the transportation bill that gave Illinois $580 million to extend that rail line service to connect the most disenfranchised community in the city. That money is sitting there until 2011 because we've got to get another $120 million from the state and the city combined. Well, we already know the Olympics, they just passed a bill yesterday in Illinois from a state that's $9 billion in debt to guarantee $250 million for the Olympics to come. So we're going to get our $120 million. All right, all right. But what has happened is that it has empowered the community. We know all about transportation issues in our neighborhood. You know, there's almost, in my ward, we had a referendum on transportation, whether we should build a red line or not, put it on the ballot. It became the most successful referendum in the history of the city of Chicago. So the community residents have been empowered. They understand the issues. And a couple of months ago, we were, by the Regional Transportation Authority in our area, we were granted the oversight of the building of the red line and the alternative analysis study, which really says that even the government can't build it until they get our approval. And then they gave us money to approve it. Now, no community group in the history of organizing has ever gotten that funding. They only give that funding to municipalities. But they looked at the community and they said, you know more about this stuff than your own city government. We would rather have you build the train in your neighborhood than to have the city have general oversight of it. All right. Now the city is asking us, what can we do? Because they know they want to build a line to keep people downtown during the Olympics. We're not going to let them build it unless ours get built. Our song in our community right now is "There's a Train a-Coming." You remember that old Curtis Mayfield, "People get ready, there's a train a-coming." Yeah, $10 billion in economic development. So it's transit-oriented development. It's going to cost $720 million to build a train, but it's going to be worth $10 billion in economic development from 95th Street South to the end of the city limits at 130th for our community. That means jobs. That means sustainable jobs for the people in our neighborhoods and the most disaffected. So community organizing is about, building up our relationships one with the other. Everybody in this room, you ought to get to know somebody that you didn't know before you came into this room. It's building our relationships, which helps us to build the capacity, determining what should be done, what can be done with the available resources, and then really knowing who is willing so that we know what will be done.